Welcome to episode 53 of Chat with the Chair. I'm Caryl Coronis, CFMA's 2024-25 chair, and I'd like to introduce our guests today, Nathan Wood and Charlie Dunn. And we're going to bring to you a few things about the Construction Progress Coalition and maybe finding ways to make your processes easier, better, and also less costly, along with some ways to open up some things when we're really hardworking, hard charging, and just set aside some time to plan. So I'd like for you guys to introduce yourself. Nathan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Nathan Wood. I'm the executive director with the Construction Progress Coalition. We do, again, educational nonprofit supporting data interoperability and advancing open data standards. And it also supports the consulting that I do with Spectrum AEC. So I'm happy to be here.
Hey, and Charlie Dunn. Have a kind of a flywheel career. So one of the things I work on, I call flow state experience, which are workshops and kind of active hands-on do to learn events. And then through that was connected to Mortenson Construction, where kind of full-time role in focusing on flow planning to bring industrial TAC planning to the construction industry with a goal to make it a kind of an enterprise standard. And for me, it's really a good learning journey. There's, calling myself an experienced beginner and some of an approach mostly coming from Japanese and Toyota influence for how to do lean, and very strong connection to CFMA and this, important stewardship of financial resources in an industry that, Nathan and I have riffed on this in a lot of different ways, but the demand is going to outstrip the current supply without improvement in almost every area of construction, and how we fund and control costs on projects is a very important part of that.
Great. I know that in conversations with both of you guys, we've come up with some really interesting topics. One of the things that CFMA is looking forward to is our conference in May. And I know some of the opinions about conferences and how they're currently run. I'd like to hear some information on that and how we can make that better.
You want to start, Charlie? I know you have an opinion on this.
Hey, I've got a very simple thought that occurred to me yesterday. I've been fortunate to learn from watching some people. We talked about Duncan Hornell, but there's another individual, Seth Godin, who recently talked about this at an event for people who put on conferences. And his statement was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you came to a conference to learn. He said, I did, other people did. He said, but now the learning is actually online, more efficient. So what is it that we're doing when we come together? So, there can still be that learning component, but his challenge was to create tension and memorable connection. And by tension, he meant things that you don't know the answer to or that are a stretch for who you are in the moment that you're going to have to rise or shift or challenge your thinking. So my simplification of that is, if we're at a conference and the thing we do in the room on stage and with screens, we could also do as a webinar, then we've missed this evolution in why it is we bring people together. So if it can be a webinar, it should be at a conference. If it's people engaging in a way that they couldn't do remotely, and there's a lot of creative ways to do this, now we're moving forward in what we do with events when we bring people together.
But I think that's admittedly hard, right? Because it's easy to have a presentation where you have a case study where there was a problem and you solve that problem. So you're presenting the problem, but you already have that solution in your back pocket. It's very different to come into a room with a problem that we all share, but not know what the answer is and not have an answer to it. Like that's kind of admittedly a scary thing to do. But that's the tension, right? Like
the tension of we don't have the answer.
Yeah.
But then there's this other, and this has been part of my learning journey on how to help influence change. Autonomy is a very real thing in a lot of different ways. And the way I believe autonomy interacts with a strategy for a conference or an event is this: you do in order to learn. You never learn and then go do. And so if we show up and we tell the answer, we've now robbed the people hearing that answer of that opportunity with their own autonomy to discover that answer. So the wiser teacher, and this goes all the way back to the Socratic method, does not give the answer. The wiser teacher creates the opportunity for someone to do and then learn. And again, that's a more difficult effort. It's easy to throw together PowerPoint, some pictures, some bullet points. This is what happened. This is what we did. But my experience has been, it's worth stepping back and saying, okay, how can we create something to introduce the tension, to have some perhaps guided doing, but even better, some unguided doing, that then groups, as they work on it, come to what that answer is. Or, Nathan, as you've experienced your event, come to, okay, we've hit this thing and now we can't answer it until we go get this, this, and this. And then we come back to this problem and we can engage with it in a more meaningful way. But it's that fundamental people do and then they learn that we can't get away from.
So what are some examples? Can you give us some examples about ways that we might be able to do that within our organization?
I mean, how would you do that in front of 200 people, like at MEP Innovation? Right, Charlie?
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah, you find ways to let people do the work. So I could see, for example, one of the things we talked about that getting to know each other was this analytics opportunity, and how do you do storytelling with data? So here's a challenge. Here's the financial data as we know it. And then in small groups, you workshop on what are the important things to pull out from this data. And then I always believe it's good to go analog before digital. And then analog, let's build out wireframe what the storytelling for this data is going to look like, and then present it out and critique it. And then perhaps even depending on the time, number of people, then have an improvement on that. And then even potentially, then you go into, okay, if the group is comfortable enough with actual tools, build it out and make it real digitally. But that's just one idea, that you're given a ton of data, but you have to say, all right, what's the story in this data that's going to matter, and create action when people have insight on what they see. But I always default to tactile things. So if we can include Lego,
right.
And there's a good example, for CFMA that comes from Conspectus, where they've developed Lego. Actually did it at Nathan's event last year, but they've since layered in a financial component where, there are different roles, and each role is essentially scored in a different way. So there's a design role that's scored on a design value. There's then the general contractor, which has a financial role scored on the cost assigned to pieces. Then there's a trade role that has score on based on schedule and hitting a schedule component. And then there's a facility management role that has an additional separate cost for the life cycle value. So you have this tension introduced, which is natural in all of our projects. You want to hit the design intent. You need to meet the first cost. You need to try to meet the schedule, and then you want to be optimized for facility cost. Although I say that, so often there's a disconnect and we don't understand the opportunity for the life cycle cost when we're doing the initial, and we'll make poor decisions. We'll essentially give away real ROI opportunity and how we include people in those decisions. But anyway, as you work through multiple iterations of this, you see when people are not working together and understand the constraints that each person is dealing with and the goals each person is dealing with, then you get a suboptimal solution. But in a very short period of time, you then experience, okay, what if we do work together, information is shared freely, how do we naturally get to a more optimal solution? So there are both, more traditional ways of, for example, looking at data, to more innovative, creative ways where we'll choose something like Lego that becomes, connected to the idea and gives us a tactile way to work together on this.
And I think having been through a number of these, the almost the theme that, or maybe the sequence I'm seeing is that they're all different games that have rules that may or may not change, that create this sort of tension, or the situation that you need to create in order to have that aha, that epiphany moment, that moment of learning that is really what's going to be lasting, right? And you can't just tell them that, and that's why I think you're almost being intentionally vague, right? That we don't want to give away too much, because that's part of this whole process, is that is why you get together, because otherwise it can be a webinar if you're just sharing information. It has to be this experiential learning that is very different than someone at the front of the room just presenting on a PowerPoint, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Go
Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, there's another element that again, this is where I'm this experienced beginner, but learning from this Japanese sensei culture, that perhaps the expert is not the person that has the answer, but the expert or the sensei is the person who enables the people doing the work to find their answer.
It's interesting. I know you've mentioned a couple of things several times. One is the word tension. And then I thought it was interesting, Nathan, when you mentioned also the rules could change. So one of the things I think would be really interesting in working with things like this would be to change the roles. These are the rules right now. This is the paradigm as we see it. What happens if that changes all of a sudden? Then what? So I think the story and what happens can be really different from there. So I like that idea of the creating tension. And I know we talked about that a little bit in modeling also, and what happens in construction. You always hear measure twice, cut once, but when we actually get into the projects, and even when we're thinking about them, we want to get in there and just start going without doing the modeling and without thinking in advance. So tell me a little bit about that. I know that's something that you've concentrated on.
Yeah, and a little bit of my backstory. Again, Charlie and I both share a past with DPR construction, but in my time there doing BIM, really the term at the time was model-based production planning. I think it has since gone to integrated construction and production planning, and all kinds of different acronyms depending on what company or what part of the industry you're in. But ultimately what it is it's the intersection of all these capabilities of what BIM and the quantification and all the categorization and all the data that sits inside of there, and then all the financials, all the accounting that happens at the project level, and the fact that so much of the stuff could be in sync, but is not, for, again, a number of reasons that we'll go into. And I think that's why this whole rules changing is so important in these activities or the games that are played in these lessons, because in the real world, every project is different. Every contract is different. The rules do change. So how do you play the game differently depending on what the rules are, is part of this whole being agile and having the right mindset to be effective in the future, because it's not going to be a perfect state anytime soon. So we have to really deal with the rules that we're given and make the best of it. And that's, this whole problem solving is really at its core. So the better we are at problem solving, the faster we'll solve these problems. And I'm personally think that BIM is a big part of it. But connecting BIM to financials is really, I think, where we're going to take off.
I'd like to go a slightly different direction with this. Given the CFMA audience, I think we labor under the wrong assumption that faster is less expensive in this industry. And so there's always this pressure and this critical path time conversation, and we can't delay. We've got to go. I would like to see some honesty, and I use that word intentionally, in our cost models for the impact of rework. I would like to see some honesty in our cost models for the actual material that we waste. Because if we do that, I think we will slow down at the outset, do better planning, move to more industrial processes, create more opportunity for manufacturing offsite, invest in design. That often, because of we labor under this wrong model, we haven't changed the rules the right way. We work to a lowest first cost, and we give away, and the numbers are staggering. 30% rework, and that's before we get to how much actual tool time do we have. But that's just actual, we put it in place and then we redo it. 30 to 35% material waste, materials that come to a job site that leave in a dumpster.
Mhm.
And those aren't accounted for. Again, I mean, occasionally you'll get a trade partner who says, yes, this is what we're carrying for handling waste, for the time to actually get the waste off the site. General contractor will carry, this is our dumpster, but these are huge opportunities, and changing the rules so that what if we prioritized going after rework, and what would it take to get to a zero rework condition? And that's what flow planning is about, and TAC planning, so that you don't start a TAC train of work or wagons within that train until you know that everything you need is ready for that work. The information, the materials, the people, the equipment, the inspections on the right rhythm, all of these things that so often we don't plan for this rhythm and flow. We just start the work and we go as fast as we can. And again, we've been taught, or we've come into a industry where faster is better. Faster means cheaper, but it doesn't.
Well, I know, coming from, having done all kinds of different things in construction, I just know that especially when you're working as a sub, um, basically you're taught, you need to be fast, you need to get in, you need to get out, the only thing that can happen with time is that you're going to end up spending more money on the project. So what that really hasn't done is allowed for the opportunity to plan and try to make sure that going in, you've eliminated a lot of that stuff that can happen. And then you can still be on time, and you can still produce the work and at a less cost and with less waste. So I think that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Nathan, you have anything else on that?
I mean, just to go back to that point on measurement, I know, Caryl, you're very passionate about the benchmark report, and I'm one of my, I guess, lean heroes, Eli Goldratt. One of his famous quotes is, "Tell me how I measured, and I'll tell you how I behave." Or this whole concept like that measurement drives your mindset. I think there's so much of this. The problem in our industry is that we again, by nature of contract, by nature of all of these external forces that we may or may not be able to control, our measurements are out of whack with Charlie's vision of flow state. And so until we fix all of these contracts and all these mindsets based on these contracts that are broken, it's going to be very hard for us to reach this flow state mindset, because you really have to focus on the project as the most important thing, not your own company's bottom line. And until those two things are aligned, it's going to be really hard for us to want to do this stuff. Because Caryl, I think you always come back to okay, but why do we do this? And then where are we going to go from here? You're always
where are we going
helping
from
us
here?
do that, right? And my whole thing is, if there's not a really good why, it's going to be hard to come up with a where do we go from here, right? And that it's okay to wait until you've got a really good why, because otherwise, spinning our wheels on the where do we go from here stuff without having a really good motivational why, in my experience, has just led to more burnout and more frustration. So my whole thing is I'm not trying to be lazy. I'm trying to say, don't burn out on something that's not going to be effective if we don't have a really good motivational why behind it. And so much that, again, to me, goes back to contracts, but Charlie may have a different opinion, hopefully.
Well, no, it certainly, contracts are a component of this. And I'm coming back to with the opportunity of CFMA. I'm just putting the idea out there. This idea of what rules should we change? And I've been inspired by Duncan Wardle, who started in public relations, became head of innovation at Disney, but he has a series of things, and just last year released a book. But one of the things he talks about that is that what if is the way he phrases it. What if, and list out, here's all the rules we work with, and then what if one of these were changed? If you could do that, that would be a fascinating kind of workshop with CFMA, but to understand. And Nathan, the reason I say that is this is kind of maybe hopefully the humility that's on the way with this Sensei way of thinking is, yes, you and I look at it from a distance, and we've observed these things, and we're quick to jump to it's this or it's this. But to use your language, how might we enable the CFMA professionals that do this every day, 365, right? If they were posed with this, these were the rules, and what rules could we change? What would be the outcome? And to enter into that not knowing, and see where that goes. Anyway, that's where my mind is. That would be a cool thing to do with the CFMA group at some time.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that. What if some of these rules changed, and how would it make things better, and where could we go? Yeah, I love that. I know that you guys have talked to me a little bit about a FICO score for projects.
Mhm.
And, of course, with us all being financial people at CFMA in one way or the other, the idea of a FICO score sounds really interesting and intriguing. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So that comes from some interesting research and a fun story at the University of Texas, Austin. Unfortunately bad with names, but there's a globally known, recognized organizational psychologist, and then of course UT Austin has the CII, Construction Industry Institute, does a lot of research, and so he was asked to look at research about the essentially the problems in the construction industry and the things that we've kind of danced around here, the contracts and the bad behavior and the what can evolve into, forcing the trade partner to go faster and how you hold people, all these things. And he looked at the research. He said, yes, this industry is messed up. And unfortunately, there's not even a model that captures how messed up the industry is. But perhaps you could get better by learning from the neighborhood. And so he introduced these CII researchers to this concept of neighborhood, where neighborhoods, as they grow, they naturally gain efficiency. Whereas most organizations, as they grow, they lose efficiency. And so this is that irony where we've put in place contracts and controls trying to gain control and trying to gain efficiency, but perhaps we might learn more by working in the neighborhood. Then that evolved into, okay, so what does a neighborhood mean? How do we bring together the right players, the right technology, the right agreements at the right time? And then this idea of a FICO score is, if we understood this neighborhood concept and setting up a project in the right neighborhood model, we might be able to predict, based on each of these characteristics, the FICO score, the probability for financial and design intent and customer satisfaction, all these things for a construction project. So it's still in its infancy, but it appears there's a path where this could happen, and then that becomes where maybe the rules change, that the current owner, then architecture, then general contractor, then trade partner, then material supplier model breaks, and there's this, one of the ideas on the FICO score is, perhaps part of the FICO score is, how is the team built, and who are the players on the team becomes more important than how are the contracts structured and who are the entities on the contracts. Another big one is on the FICO score, how much modularity, how much offsite industrial prefabrication is done. So that's the kind of, to me, that's where the thinking for FICO score came from, and I think so. It's one of those kind of aspirational things. How might we get there? Because if you think about it as an owner right now of capital spend, the landscape is rough.
Yes.
You launch a project, and what certainty do you have on cost and schedule?
Yeah, so that's the incentive for an owner, is that they have so much. If they know that their uncertainty by not having data, they should be incentivized to spend more to get that data. But then again, how does that on the flip side turn into an incentive for those that supply the data to provide it in a structured way that they can do something with it? Like it seems very simple, but like that is very much a business model mechanics that is not working today. That I think with CFMA we can figure out, because it has been. I mean, Textura is one of the really leading examples in the industry of early examples of a what we call an external interoperability between a trade contractor and a GC, or a GC and an owner, for payment exchanges, because there are so many of them and they do need to be standardized. So it's a natural fit that CFMA has already done this in places, but it's sort of like, how do we double down on where we've had success to really open up this possibilities of what if we shared more of this or there or that, what could we get in return, rather than just, coming at it very defensively.
And that's a great point, Nathan. Like FICO score is possible because you have data standardization.
Yeah.
Right. Full stop.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting concept, and the neighborhood concept. And I think our realization that the people that we're working with on these projects is extremely important. I loved your idea of talking about a time machine. And so, you talk about a time machine and you talk about construction. Talk a little bit about how the time machine can help us.
So the genesis for me was working at McGuire Nuclear Station, and we were doing work that we could not go to where the work would take place because of the conditions. It's an operating nuclear plant and there's radiation. So we had to plan work where we only had access to the space, ideally 30 days and a 36-day outage with some upfront and downtime. Anyway, every 18 months. And I had learned early in my career about this concept of the gimbal walk or going to the place, and that's how you make work better, that you can go and see the place. And then, so it dawned on me, there's this irony in construction that if we want to go to the place of work and improve it, our work doesn't exist yet. It's not like a manufacturing line where the line is there and you can go and see it and adjust it and do all the things. So if we're going to do this, there's this opportunity with digital twin to create the actual work with a time machine. So you take people into the future. This is the work in the place. This is what it's going to look like. Now we come back to the present and we try to improve that work. And interesting, since we talked about this, I realized on my journey with this, one of the things we did for an owner that was frustrated with their cash flow forecasting is that we actually used the model rather than the schedule and rather than other, Excel methodology. And we cost loaded the model objects, and then we used the time machine to show the cash flow curve in the future. Now, no shocker to your audience, this didn't actually solve their cash flow problem because it came back to contracts and overhead and billing cycles, right? But that was a tremendous new insight, because we could then go to trade partners like, hey, you guys have a spike in value here. Does that look right? And they had missed it when they looked at their labor forecasting. Right. But when you looked at the cost of what was being put in place, so to me, that's a great example of, okay, it started from this idea of let's see the work and how the materials and equipment and all that need to move. But then anytime you can create a time machine with your financial forecasting, with we're on a site now with significant wetlands, and so your time machine modeling for what you're going to need to do with protected waterways. There's any application to this. And then one more slight connection, and I know Nathan has some thoughts here too, but that the time machine also gives us the opportunity to play. And so how do we create attention and engage better? And I observed that in very, nuclear industry, very technical, high risk. The engineers, literally the NRC could come and pull their license as an engineer. They don't do the right thing. So to get them in a mindset to play was very difficult until we introduced this time machine. And something about that changed the dynamic. And now we're playing with options, and it's okay, knowing that we're going to come back to the present and set the reality. But that's another dynamic of the time machine, is that tapping into that human capacity and desire to play.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just a couple of thoughts. I think one thing you're hitting on is that need, or that desire for certainty in such an uncertain world, that I think so much of this is based on kind of that mindset, that understanding of, well, we can project and forecast and convince ourselves through data all day long that we're going to be safe, but the reality is these risks are still out there, right? And so, like, until we're really ready to name those risks and to project them out and to do that time machine, you're not really going through that analysis process. We're just kind of putting the blinders on and shielding ourselves from it. So I think there's something first to maybe it's vulnerability is kind of the word I'd use to describe what we need to do differently, how we need to change our mindsets, that we don't need this overconfidence that everything will be fine. It's like, well, no, like we are worried about this. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page of these what if scenarios in the future. And hopefully I think in doing that, we're moving on to the second part, which is that E word of empathy, that is a huge part of the AEC Integration Summit that we do. And a lot of these workshops is really what you're doing is you're better understanding how the other half see it, whether it's trade to GC or whether it's operations to whatever the fab shop, or different perspectives. And so I thought a great example, Caryl, was on our webinar where we had the surety broker and the underwriter talking about what their life is of data entry and some of their pain points, and some of the comments that were coming in from CFMA professionals, having that, oh man, I had no idea how hard it was for them. Like I actually feel bad for them where they never would have otherwise. I think there's so much to that's almost like our version of a Campbell walk, is like until we actually go to the other side of who's receiving or sending the data to us and understand how their world is, we can't come up with those really innovative ways to solve it and get that win-win scenario, because we don't see how the other half live.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, it becomes a
very
visual story. Sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's where I was going.
Okay.
It becomes a story. And Nathan just pinned it right there with basically, we're sitting in a world thinking that, okay, these surety people are making so much money, why would we even consider inconveniencing ourselves to help them? And then we hear about their story and every day what they're having to do. And then we say, well, if we can make your life easier by doing this, then we can do it. We can do it. So, and I know, Charlie, one of the things you talk about is storytelling. And so how do you bring storytelling into this when you really learn from doing, but yet storytelling is telling about something that you may have done? So how do you arrange those things properly?
So it's a good question, and perhaps there is some irony in there. Although, to me, storytelling. I had the opportunity to read a book by a lady named Bruce Sawyer called "The Way of the Storyteller," and one of the points she made that perhaps is my first answer to your question is that the storyteller does not moralize. The storyteller does not tell the judgment, does not tell the storyteller simply tells the story and allows for that autonomy, allows for that connection and interpretation on the part of the listener. So the storyteller doesn't tell the answer. They're actually engaging in this, connection and how did it feel? What was it like? And then the key thing in storytelling, as it becomes part of connecting people emotionally to a problem and creating a desire for change, is that in a great story there is a fundamental transformation moment. And so that's really your goal, is to bring people with you to that transformation moment. And it could have been a transformation moment for you, or a transformation moment you observed in someone else that became a moment of learning or change or awareness for you. So I think it is very important to define and understand storytelling in that way, because it could become just another version of death by PowerPoint. Yes. I think there's some fascinating science on storytelling, and I benefited, I think, growing up in communities of multiple types that had great storytellers. So it's something that I observed and then began to do more. And I will say it's something where you definitely need to do. So in whatever opportunity you have to present publicly, start doing more storytelling, and then you'll learn from that. But don't be afraid to go there, because as I did that in a professional environment, and I took advantage of conferences, so this is another opportunity for CFMA. it's a fairly low risk way to go there. I'm at a conference. Nobody's going to fire me because of what happens at this conference. A lot of these people I may not interact with again. So I started going there with storytelling, with more emotional content, and the connection and the friendships and the feedback and the ahas. Like that's been my journey. I did more of it and I learned, and I did more of it and I learned. Um, so that's, I guess, maybe long answer to a very good question of how does story connect with this idea of doing. And then perhaps there's an opportunity where in a great story, people experience some of the doing through the story. This, I
Yes.
go back to there's an former Air Force fighter pilot, Dan Manning, who coaches on story, and one of those weighty statements. He said, as fighter pilots, we were told that you will not live long enough to make all mistakes. So a key part of our learning as fighter pilots was through story, so that we could learn from others' mistakes and not make them, given that often the mistakes could be fatal.
Well,
Yeah, I
isn't
know.
that the power story for all of humanity, right? I mean, like
Yes.
that's why we developed story, was to remember things to prevent ourselves from danger. It was a risk management tactic from the Stone Ages.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Storytelling, I think, brings us together. It connects us. It can also be an opportunity to tell a story to a point, and then it can have various endings, right? It can go various places from there. And so those might be some other things that you could do, right? Well, at this point in the story, you went this way, this might happen. If you go this way, something else might happen. And even the time machine is a story, right? Like you're really looking at that in the future. What might it look like? And so I think revolving all of those things around telling a story, and then you can even tell financial storytelling based on the numbers and things like that that you bring back, what you projected, what you bring back. So the idea of storytelling, I think, is it's a thread throughout all of this. So one of the things that you've talked about is not letting the sparkle die, the sparkle that's in the eyes of the children. And, Nathan and I were just talking about his children, my grandchildren. I deal with them all the time and just love the delight and the sparkle that I see in their eyes. So, how do we go through this without diminishing that sparkle and allowing people, adults, and in this industry to experience some of that wonder?
Well, to me, this was my path as a parent, and I used to introduce sometimes myself this way, that I've learned that there's a similarity between parenting and very challenging projects. Uh, and that similarity is that in one sense, it's almost too much. And you have this awareness that you're not really ready for this. So then what can you do? And you have to have a very simple anchor. And so for me as a dad with my daughter, it became this: I'm going to work hard to keep the twinkle in her eye. And with the project team, the same, that as you engage with people, whatever that engagement, and it may be controversy, it may be challenging, like we deal with these real, it may be high risk, but how do you engage in that conversation in such a way that you can both walk away with that twinkle, with that sparkle? Um, and then, so what are those pieces? Well, they can sit on empathy. There's compassion. There's, an active listening, this seek first to understand and then to be understood. There's, creating this, Duncan Wardle, borrow from him again. He often will say, who else? And he'll say that diversity is a key part of innovation. So who else, what other voice do we need in the room? So it's a lot of ways to, but then to really just to be fundamentally human, and respect the differences in people, in a way that creates, there's I think a very good movement toward understanding psychological safety and understanding trust in a different way. um, that, people perform best, and now there's a connection to flow. People perform best when they have freedom. They're not worried about making a mistake. They're not worried about, being shut down, yelled at, all these things that diminish our ability to have ideas, to be creative, to go after what's possible.
Yeah, I think along those lines of enabling curiosity, I think the one parenting tactic that has certainly been a challenge with my 4-year-old son, but to never say because I said so, but to always be able to answer the why and to give them an answer. I mean, even if it has to be a version of the truth, but to always be able to help them understand. And so enter that in the workplace. When you're the owner or when you're a GC over a trade and you have the opportunity to say, because I said so, like, are you taking that extra time to actually explain to them why, so that they may have a better response to help solve that, to open that door for that response, for that back and forth, not just to shut the door, I said so, and the conversation's over. I think that is something that certainly, as a parent, I'll continue to do and, try and do as much as we can in work when we're unable to.
I know you've mentioned, Charlie, a couple of times that when you're in the real world, like say you're running a construction project, and things may have happened in your personal life, or things may be going on, and you're not really the best version of yourself, how that might affect what's going on the project and how you carry that forward. So, how can you eliminate some of that, and get it out of the way so that the project moves better forward?
Okay, wow. This is a great question, and probably we could dig in for a long time. And just yesterday, sat through a mental health lunch and learn on a project site where there are two mental health advocates. We've recognized as an industry, as compared to the general population, we are an outlier problem. Mental health,
Yes.
and then it's sobering, but suicide, and even compared, this was new information for me yesterday, even compared to the military and PTSD and vet trauma, we're more than double in terms of numeric rates what veterans have. So the hope is, and the strategy is, recognize kind of all these aspects of your humanity, and how do you create checkpoints and opportunities to care. And it's simple things like having these two people, and it'll grow as this project grows. It's posted in every building. There's pictures, there's the number to call, just like we've had safety professionals and we've had, emergency response professionals. We now have mental health professionals that you can call. But then this active, what are you doing physically? What are you doing emotionally? What are you doing spiritually? And how are you, explore that as a human being? What are you doing with relationships? And taking the time to have some strategies and building in some consistency. Because this is pulling a thread back to one of those early things we talked about. This has been an industry where the thing was start and go as fast as you can.
Yes.
As a project team, and as an individual. And so challenge that as an individual. No, you have to have these intentional moments where you can fuel yourself, or, and your question was, because this happens to all of us, when we know we're dealing with something personally that's not our best, my answer would be, with some vulnerability, recognize that, and have someone that you work with that you're comfortable, having this conversation. Where in the past we might not have. We've got to make that okay. That it's okay for me to show up and say, hey, I'm not great in this moment, and whatever way you want to use that language. Voicing it certainly is beneficial, but then having and creating that, connectivity and support, to talk through these things, and help each other in a way that maybe we haven't before.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great words. Nathan?
I mean, Charlie took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. And then I do think you're right, Charlie, that it's a two-way part. It's the person having the challenge. And again, this is way easier said than done, because everyone in this industry is a firefighter that is always kind of on call and feels like you have to put the shield up, and it's very hard to be vulnerable in this industry. So like having someone on the other side that you feel is in a safe place so that you can be vulnerable. It really does take both sides. So it's a yes and situation for sure. But it really comes down to just, we are in a state in our industry where we need to be honest. We need to be comfortable being vulnerable, and that people go through things, and that's okay. And that we work to combat that together. We step up for one another, and that's part of what makes this industry great. And so if you're not telling anyone that you need help, nobody's going to be there to help. So you got to ask, and you got to be in a place where you feel comfortable asking.
Great. Well, I appreciate both of your being here today. I think we could talk for at least a few more hours, but it's been great hearing what you've had to say. Do you have a few parting words for our CFMA audience?
One thing I didn't plug in there that I want to, if you're Google image searching, look up the hero's journey. You talk about storytelling. There's a great little graphic there from Joseph Campbell that talks about, even if you're giving a presentation, kind of, are you going from the known to the unknown, and going through the transformations and the revelations, as Charlie, you were talking about. So it kind of has some keywords there that you can follow to really bring more storytelling into your presentations.
Yeah, and for me, for the CFMA, I have used this, productivity gap drawing that we've seen, and that, angers some of us, but as this real opportunity, and arguably the single greatest global capital opportunity is in the construction industry. And so to the CFMA audience, thank you for what you're doing. And hopefully we can grow the CFMA's influence and begin to leverage more of this capital opportunity. Because that's my personal belief. That's what gets me excited being in this industry, where the world is going to be decades from now. The arc of construction is going to have tremendous influence in that. So that's my thank you to the CFMA.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you. And we will include some information here about how to reach out to Nathan, to the Construction Progress Coalition, how to get in touch with Charlie where he sees, I know he's on LinkedIn quite a bit, but, and we'll also contain some links, put some links up about some of the things that Charlie and Nathan have referenced during this conversation. So much good information here. Thanks again so much. And until next time with Chat with the Chair. Bye.